The government's decision to effectively end the vast majority of COVID restrictions next week once again brings into question the policy of making vaccines compulsory for NHS staff.
From April, anybody who works for the health service, from doctors and surgeons to porters and cleaners, will face the sack if they refuse to be jabbed.
Has this now become a matter of conscience as much as an issue of public health?
Later today, a group called NHS100k, which highlights the plight of 100,000 staff who could lose their jobs, will be joining protesters in central London as part of the worldwide rally for freedom. We'll be joined in a moment by Orthopaedic Surgeon Ahmad Malik. But first, let's speak to one of the founding members of NHS100k, Lilith, who is in the capital preparing to take part in the march. Lilith, what are the aims of today's protests?
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me on your program. So the aims for today is basically to raise public awareness that as healthcare staff, we're about to lose our jobs. We've worked throughout the pandemic, given our all, given extra shifts, worked with minimal PPE, no vaccinations. But now we're deemed a risk to the public and we're set to lose our jobs due to these mandates. So we all have different choices about why we don't want these vaccines. What we're concerned about is the precedent that it will set. If you can mandate these vaccines for the NHS, when will it start occurring in the public, to the public? When does our health become our choice, or when does it become the government's choice? We're very much ralliers for the right to choose, and because it's such a core issue for healthcare professionals, where we must respect patients' decisions, whether it's good or bad. It just has been quite a blow for a lot of us and how we operate. Yeah.
And what will be happening today, Lilith? What will be happening in central London and I believe other cities across England?
Yeah, so we're all standing against these vaccine mandates, and to do that, we're laying down our uniform in protest. A lot of us are going to sacrifice our jobs to say no to these vaccine mandates because we do believe it is inherently wrong to force people into this.
And Lilith, what discussions have you had with the government about this? Is there a chance that the government are going to change their mind?
We'd like to hope so. We've sent an email out to Surgeon Ahmad to have a meeting with us and the members of the NHS100k so that he can hear the personal sort of stories behind the effect of these mandates. So we've asked all our members to petition their local MPs, to speak to media, to have this happen for us. We've not heard anything from Surgeon Ahmad, which is a little bit expected, but we're hoping that today will bring to light that there are individuals involved in this vaccine mandate, and we're set to lose a lot of very valuable staff, very experienced staff, and it's not just healthcare staff, it's your students are being affected, your back of house staff are being affected, from your cooks to your delivery drivers to the logistics that make hospitals work. So we just want to raise this awareness to the public that they're about to lose their public health service.
Lilith, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you've got a busy day. You've got to get to your spot in central London to meet all your other colleagues. You'll be giving a speech at 1 and then you'll be marching down to Trafalgar Square. So thank you for joining us. And we are also joined in the studio by Orthopaedic Surgeon Ahmad Malik. So what have you got against mandatory vaccinations?
Good morning. Thanks, Esther and Philip, for having me here. Great question, and I've done a lot of work over the last 24 hours trying to think of the answer, and this morning it was crystal clear as my 6-year-old daughter looked up at me and said, "Why are you going to the TV studio?" And I looked at her and I saw the answer, and it's really simple. On one hand, we've got mandates, and on the other hand, we've got freedom. Personal freedom, bodily autonomy, informed consent. And if you think you can have both, you're gravely mistaken, because they're the exact opposite. They repel each other. And this is coming from the background as a surgeon, a doctor for 23 years. I've consented thousands of patients. So consent is something, it's very close to me, and I know something a little bit about it. And it's the cornerstone of medical ethics. Having the ability to choose what's done to your body or what's not done to your body is something we've taken for granted for centuries. And like most things that we take for granted, we don't really appreciate how important it is. And if we have this mandatory vaccination business coming through, well, that's actually earth-shattering. That demolishes that whole concept of personal bodily autonomy. And we're opening a Pandora's box. Now, I get it. Civil liberties and human rights are the essence of a liberal democracy. And in some parts of the world, there's medical interventions that are forced on other people because that's the authoritarian state, maybe North Korea or China, and that's what they expect. But that's not something we have here in the UK.
But you'd have hepatitis B, and you've got to take that. So that's mandated for, the medical profession.
I hear this argument all the time, and it's fundamentally flawed and irrational and illogical. So I have taken lots of vaccines over the years, and the premise is you take a vaccine to protect yourself. My children had vaccines as children in school, measles, mumps, rubella, to protect themselves. They didn't take those vaccines to protect their classmates or their teachers. Actually, you tell me one...
Is that not vaccines? Is that not an evolution?
No.
Are you not meant to be protecting your patients? You were making sure the public were taking these vaccines. So what about your patients?
That's a great thing. And I've been taking care of my patients for 23 years. But you tell me one medical intervention that's been used to protect someone else and not themselves. It doesn't happen. And the argument about hepatitis B is fundamentally flawed, and I want to debunk this because it keeps popping up now and again, and Sajid Javid keeps talking about it, and it's just wrong. So traditional Hep B vaccines are taken to protect the healthcare worker. That's a fact. And there are no mandatory vaccinations in the UK. That's a fact. They're recommended, but you can still practice if you don't have a hepatitis B vaccine. You didn't know that, and a lot of people don't know this. When you have a hepatitis B vaccine, which has been around for over 30 years, it typically confers lifelong immunity, and it has an incredibly safe track record, minimal complications. Now, on the flip side, we're being told, take this vaccine to protect your patients, not necessarily yourself. We're told that it's safe, but there is data showing that people are dying, having serious side effects from this. It isn't well established. It is experimental. The phase 3 trials run until 2023. And we are now forcing individuals to give up their bodily autonomy and take this vaccine. And if we're now going to go down this route where we say, OK, well, let's override bodily autonomy in the interests of others, where does that lead us? Because that's opening a really dangerous Pandora's box. And why not have compulsory organ donation? You've got 2 healthy kidneys, you don't need 2. Let's give one away. I mean, where does it end? And I think that's important.
Esther asked about this in Parliament this week, and the Prime Minister said that actually the NHS were in favour of this mandatory vaccination for NHS workers. Is that your understanding of where the NHS is on this?
I'm not up to date with what the NHS statements are about this, but I think from what I've heard from doctors, healthcare workers, private NHS, there's so many people who are really terrified, scared, anxious, fearing, their livelihoods, their careers, their ability to look after their families, because they're making a choice between, for a variety of different reasons, including sometimes their health, and taking this vaccine. And it's unprecedented.
But Ahmed, what about the relationships now between workers in the NHS, those who haven't taken the vaccine, those who had? Is there tensions now within the NHS?
There are so many tensions. And, the NHS has been struggling for years and years. We've been short-staffed. And it's interesting that Boris Johnson, in his 2019 manifesto, 6-point manifesto, the first thing he said was, I'm not going to promise, I'm going to guarantee 50,000 extra nurses. Well, sacking 100,000 healthcare workers isn't really going to help. So where does that play into?
And you won't before, I think you've got to have the first jab, the 3rd or 4th of February. You're not going to have that vaccination. You are remaining absolutely, you'd sooner give up your job than have this vaccination.
Yeah. Yes, and I don't want to focus on myself. I want to focus on some of the data that's coming out, because we're told, take this vaccine to protect your patients. And if you look at the UK Safety Agency data, there's some incredible stuff coming out, which shows that if you're double vaccinated and boosted, you're more likely to get infected than vaccinated. There's a study that's just come out of Israel, Gazette et al. They've looked at the vaccines and unvaccinated group, and the vaccinated group are 27 times higher risk of developing symptoms and 8 times higher risk of hospitalisation. I don't want to get into the data, but what it's trying to say is this whole premise that take the vaccine, reduce hospitalisation, make things safer, is actually nonsense. It's the other way around. And now even the CDC are coming out saying natural immunity is what's paramount. And why have we not talked about this? And if we come back to informed consent, it's about giving people choices and options. It's not just vaccine. Why have we never talked about any other treatment options? Because that's patient safety as well.
Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much indeed for coming in today. We'll be following...
I think there's a poll in the Sunday Express tomorrow showing that the majority of the public actually agree with you.
Yes, and that was a bit of an exclusive there, wasn't it, in the Express tomorrow about that poll. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And we'll be following the story on GB News today about those 100,000 NHS workers set to lose their job. Coming up...